All right, and welcome everyone to this Thursday session for the Really Top Impact Companies Speaker Series with number 20 here on this year's 2025 Top Impact Companies list. Dan Green, the CEO of Helpsy. Dan, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, before we dive in, Dan, I just want to share this quick story, okay? I go back home to go visit my fiance's family, and she's got three younger brothers in high school. Maybe we talked about this beforehand, but I show up to the house and I meet them for the first time, and man, they're just wearing some baggy clothes. They're wearing some kind of passed down jeans, some denim jeans, some hoodies that you might find maybe a trucker wearing or someone else on the street wearing. And I got to ask myself, is everything okay? What's going on? Why are they wearing this kind of clothing, all this baggy clothing? And she said, no, 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 that's in now. That's the style now. Thrift shopping is what all the kids are into these days. And a little fact here for everyone watching this, secondhand clothing market is expected to reach $350 billion globally by 2028. That's a source for ThreadUp, outpacing the growth of fast fashion. Okay, fast fashion. We're producing now over 16 million tons of new clothing. Only 15% of textiles actually get recycled. And so we are starting to see this kind of paradigm shift of people shifting into this new secondhand clothing market and starting to think about the reuse of clothing. Anyway, Dan, those are my opening thoughts here. Would love to learn what your experience is and maybe why you see such an opportunity here with Helpsy.
Yeah, I think, well, thank you for that. I think that people aren't crazy, right? And used clothes are cheaper and more fashionable and tell a better story than anything you can buy off the rack somewhere new, right? There's more effort involved in tracking down the items that you want, but there's a real reward. There's a real connection with the clothing. I think it's not surprising that secondhand clothing is exploding the way it is. You know, I think we've passed the tipping point of new clothes, becoming more and more trash-like, and people are looking for ways to, spread their wings and be more individual. And used clothing is definitely to do it. I know in the town where I grew up and went to college, it's 4,000 people in the town. There are now three thrift stores in that town, two vintage stores and a Goodwill, so they're popping up everywhere, and that's great because the demand from consumers in those stores is what supports the recycling infrastructure in this country.
So Dan, most people, I didn't say most people, but the layman, let's say, might think, yeah, hey, if I got some clothes, either I'm taking it to Goodwill or perhaps I'm throwing it away, right? That's what happens currently here. Tell me a little bit more about how, I guess, the consumer messaging you're trying to have in terms of clothes aren't trash. That's been the hashtag I've loved that Helpsy has had for so long. Tell me a little bit more about how Helpsy works in terms of sorting and reusing textiles.
Yeah, so the waste hierarchy, right, starts out with reduce, right? I think that's actually a little bit less applicable in the used clothing world. I think people should go ahead and overconsume, buy as much from Goodwill as they want. That is a pretty good way to support the infrastructure, right? But in general, you want to reduce and then reuse, right? So reuse is really what we mean when people say clothing recycling. Clothing by and large is not mechanically or chemically recycled in any real quantity. That's a lot of the conversation. That's where the brands want the conversation to be. But the reality really is human beings transporting clothes to a thrift store, either directly to a store or through a clothing bin, like the ones Helpsy has. Other human beings sorting those clothes and figuring out, either with the help of technology like ours or just in their brains, what's going to sell for what price at what store. And to get the right clothing items in front of the right consumers so that people can have the right experience.
And so maybe for the people on this call as well, tell us about the innovative impact model that Helpsy has. You mentioned collection bins, but also there's an incentive to have a collection bin at your place as well. Tell me a little bit about the scale of the operations right now and how the model actually innovates for impact.
Yeah, so conveniently enough, right, clothes have a lot of value, right? In addition to being very resource intensive to produce, they have a lot of value. That value needs to be unlocked through a sorting process, right? So what Helpsy has three lines of business, right? The primary business has been to collect clothes from about 1,200 collection bin sites across the East Coast of the U.S., as well as to collect unsold clothing from about 250 thrift stores. We did about 550 drives over the last year, and we recently now can announce a contract with the city of New York to collect from a couple thousand apartment buildings inside the city. So the first job of Helpsy is to get the clothes out of the trash, right? And that means make it convenient and ideally also compelling for the consumer to not throw the clothes away, right? We don't fundamentally care if the consumer gives the clothes to a Goodwill, puts them in a clothing bin, a Helpsy bin or a competitor bin. We just want them to not throw them away, right? We're essentially all on one team here competing against the landfill. And it also means, our messaging says, don't worry about what's in your bag of clothes. We want your really nice jacket. We want your socks with holes in them. We want the whole thing. We definitely want your underwear, right? We want all this stuff. And we don't want people to spend time thinking about, oh, this item should go here, this item should go there. Stick it all in a bag and stick the bag in a bin or send the bag to a store, right? And that's because, anything that can delay or frustrate the process for the consumer is going to increase the waste.
And just for our information here, let's think about a pie chart here. Of the 100% clothes that come in, what percentage goes to secondhand markets? What percentage goes to recycling or fabrics or rugs or hand racks, things like that? And what percentage actually goes to waste in
Yeah,
landfills?
so industry wide, and these are estimates from the industry association. They are consistent with my own experience, but the reality on the ground is going to vary a lot by time of year and where things go, right? But a little bit more than half are resold as is as clothes, right? That's the highest value channel. It's well over 90% of the value and about 50% of the clothes. Another 25% or so are good enough to be used as wiping rags. So these are cut in a mechanical process, and you can buy these at Home Depot. You can, if you own a factory or a bar, you're probably consuming these. So you have a choice of buying, virgin ones or used ones. If you buy used ones, particularly ones that are not white, they are much, much cheaper and obviously much better for the environment. The remaining 25% or so, about 5% will end up in the trash one way or the other, either rejects from the cutting process or wet and moldy clothing, stuff with paint on it, that kind of thing, right? And about 20% is really low value reuse. Right now, this is primarily shoddy, which is like carpet padding, insulation, that kind of stuff. This is where the innovation should be concentrated as far as textile to textile recycling. And Helpsy's been spending a lot of resources, moving the ball down the field as far as connecting the right recycling processes with the right feedstocks of clothing. But the primary stream is, and in my opinion, should remain the reuse stream.
Dan, thank you. Now, what's so inspiring about this interview is that, we've been tracking and really working with Helpsy since I think maybe before 2020. I mean, you guys have been an Impact Award winner for a while. And each year you continue to grow and grow and grow. And now, 1,200 collection bins, you're scaling your operations. Take me kind of through that journey. I know a lot of the people on this call are looking to scale their impact. They're running into some constraints with growth and impact and all the things that I'm sure you have experienced. When you think about scale so far for Helpsy, how do you define it? And where maybe, I guess, walk us through that journey in order to get to the point that you are at today.
Yeah, so if you're looking to scale and make a lot of money and not have it be super stressful, I'm probably not your guy, right? That's not what I'm doing, right? What I'm trying to do is employ the most people in the kind of jobs I'm proud to employ them in, keep the most clothes out of the trash, and fundamentally try to fix the problem. And the problem here, the way we define the solution is make thrift stores more profitable, right? As physical thrift stores become more profitable, since there are basically no barriers to entry, you'll have more thrift stores. The more thrift stores you have, the more people are going to buy used, and the more people are going to give used clothing to those stores, right? And so Helpsy's mission really boils down to making these people more profitable. The way we talk about our mission is keeping clothes out of the trash and creating honorable work and making a profit. Sort of in that order, actually. Um, and but that really boils down to fundamentally fixing the infrastructure in this country to reuse clothing. And that infrastructure exists, it's robust, it's incomplete. And that infrastructure is essentially thrift stores. And by which I also mean consignment stores, online stores, all that kind of stuff, but primarily physical thrift stores. So the journey of scaling Helpsy has been a series of decisions, well thought through or not, that have been guided by our mission to keep clothes out of the trash and create honorable work, right? And so they're different decisions than someone might make if they have a different definition of success, right? Um, our decisions have led us to borrow lots of money, invest essentially all our personal money, take substantial financial risk, uh, have the company be unprofitable at periods of time. It's been a journey that has not been without risk or stress, right? Where we are now is a place where we've I think addressed some of the credibility issues of the clothing collection industry, and it gets to the point where we are signing municipal contracts, about one a week, and this New York City contract is by far the largest, and we are kind of moving clothing collection and recovery out of the shadows and are able to have a seat at the table in discussing and debating things like EPR legislation, and the most efficient way to employ the most people that are facing the largest barriers to sort and recover the clothing. So what I'm doing today is having some pretty interesting discussions with a couple of nonprofits, including Goodwill, who really specialize in creating jobs for people with disabilities. Helpsy's built software that accidentally makes it easier for people with disabilities, certain kinds of disabilities, to sort clothing efficiently. And now we're leveraging that by getting the expertise of these nonprofits who've been employing people with disabilities for a long time to teach us how to build the right supportive workplace to make this happen. And it's super exciting because, it's I'm very impressed by people that build businesses that employ people with disabilities, but I'm much happier to do it in a way where our feedstock is trash, right? And our output is not trash. So it's pretty great. It's pretty uplifting. I want to say it's pretty rewarding. It's also difficult because with municipal contracts and nonprofits comes a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of contractual requirements, a lot of things we have to deal with. And Helpsy is still fundamentally a shoestring operation, right? So, sort of because we're not very good at what we do and profitability wise, and also sort of by design, right? When we get an extra two nickels to rub together, we hire somebody, right? And we give them a job and we make that work. So it's super exciting. But I think we're moving to a place where ultimately the economics of secondhand retail will be further improved by the work we're doing on the production and pricing side and the technology side. And that's going to enable, I think, the further normalization of secondhand as the way normal people shop, right? So it's pretty phenomenal. There's 15% is not an acceptable diversion rate, right? I would say 50% is probably not an acceptable diversion rate, right? There's a lot more ground to cover, and it's super exciting to be part of this journey to make this happen.
Awesome, Dan. Thank you. Now, I want to get to employment practices in just a bit in terms of employee ownership, diversity, kind of the environment that I guess the type of employee that you've been able to attract as well. But before we do that, I want to stay here on this kind of scaling path, this journey, because again, this is really top of mind for a lot of leaders in our community. Tell me a little bit about what the company was like before that initial round of fundraising, and what was that initial round of fundraising for? Was it for these collection bins? Was it high capital costs? Was it software? Tell me a little bit about that, and maybe how the goals have shifted over time, if you have maybe different phases of the scaling process. Are there kind of different phases? So I guess in a sense, my question is, tell me about that initial phase of where Helpsy was before it had capital and how it's changed since.
Yeah. So taking it back to when my partners and I, bought the initial three companies that formed Helpsy back in 2017. Before we did that, we kind of got our houses in order in that we all married really well to people who had health insurance as part of their jobs and were willing to have us, go on this adventure that was essentially a paycheck-free adventure for a long time. Um, uh, I had a lot of compensation from my time at Wall Street that I was able to put into this. And my partners and I, knew enough people that believed in what we were doing to kind of put together seed capital to make this happen. We also, because we were buying tangible assets, we were able to finance things through bank loans and SBA loans and things like that. So that's how we've made the 16 acquisitions that are kind of the backbone of Helpsy's collection business. Um, we in 2021 we raised equity capital at a time when secondhand platforms like ThreadUp um, uh, and various other places were really hot, right? And that was money we raised to compete essentially with ThreadUp in the online sale of individually photographed items. We did that through another platform, and then we did it with our own platform. The economics of that business, I think, are extremely difficult. There are niche players who sell really high-end things as one way to solve it. But selling a $12 item to a consumer that's got a $6 shipping fee attached to it and a 35% return rate, and the norm is free shipping both ways, is a pretty easy way to guarantee that you're losing money on everything you sell, right? I have a lot of respect for the people that are still in that space. We do a lot of business, frankly, with those people on the wholesale side. But I think it's super, super difficult, and I'm glad I'm no longer trying to figure it out. So the money we raised essentially went into that sinkhole. And in fact, we lost more than we raised. So then the underlying collection business had to kind of dig that out. But a convenient byproduct of that was the sorting technology that we're now spending a lot of resources on, and is frankly generating a lot of our profits. That sorting technology enables us to sell branded inventory to resellers, so either physical stores or folks who make their living online. And instead of buying a mystery box, if they're buying 40 units of J. Crew Madewell from us, they're buying exactly 40 units of exactly J. Crew Madewell, and those units won't have more than X amount of damage, right? And so we're bringing transparency to a world that is, typically kind of like barcode free, right? We're bringing data to it. So if you run a store, you may know what brands you sell, but you don't know which brands you don't sell, right? And we're able to give them that kind of information, as well as to enable stores to price based on the experience of our 8,000 customers and what prices they're able to sell at and what prices they're not, right? So that software all came out of the e-commerce, the direct consumer model. So now we have this micro wholesale model, which is pretty exciting. We have a few brand partnerships that are also key parts of fueling that. I'm not really allowed to get into those, but I am grateful to those brands that are willing to allow us to buy their returns or other excess products rather than throwing it away, right? Many brands are still, landfill centric, right? But so Helpsy's working to try to re-educate a lot of brands, re-educate in kind of the Maoist sense of, take them to a camp and try to beat them over the head until they agree not to throw things in the trash anymore. But the mindset in the industry has a long way to go. But Helpsy now has this technology, has the infrastructure that enables us to collect flows. We also have a small global trading business that buys and sells secondhand products around the world, and that enables us to monetize the goods that thrift stores can't sell. In addition to telling them, hey, when you give us goods you don't sell, you really should be selling all this J. Crew you're not selling, and here's the price you could sell it for, right?
Sure.
So it's super exciting. I think we're on the cusp of a really transformative year. We've spent the time since late 2022 closing down the direct consumer business, fixing the operational efficiency of Helpsy, and maturing the technology. We now have, 6 collection warehouses on the East Coast, collecting about 100,000 pounds of material a day, and are increasingly efficient in how we add value to clothes through sorting, such that that business, which we invested millions of dollars in 2021 and 2022, is now a profitable part of the business, and is enabling us to take on big projects like collecting from across New York City.
Interesting. Well, it's an interesting model. Just thinking about like the size and scale of this wholesale process. And I'm sure like you guys have data on, like you just mentioned, J. Crew and a couple other brands that are probably desired the most in terms of the buyers, the secondhand market. Here's just like an quick question I'm just curious about. When it comes to brand, right? A lot of companies are focused on a brand, but also on quality, right? Like what are you seeing in terms of the actual purchases from thrift stores? Are they trying to focus on brand, on a J. Crew, on a Nike, regardless of the quality of product, or are they trying to focus on maybe these under unknown brands that have high quality, durable products that are in good condition? Like, what is the buying mindset like in your experience?
The beauty of it, right, is that different people have different uh, things that they desire, right? And in fact, there's a fair amount of what I think of as arbitrage between what a consumer in Guatemala wants and what a consumer in Williamsburg wants, right? Which is not to say that one has, better taste than the other, right? Because whatever, right? Um, the a lot of the consumers that shop in U.S. thrift stores are shopping for themselves, right? They want clothes that are comfortable and fashionable and whatever, right? They may be brand driven. They often are not. They may
Hmm.
be more kind of price driven. A huge chunk, different thrift store chains have been quoted with different numbers, but a strong minority of the sales of the largest thrift store chains in the country are to resellers that resell online. Those people don't care what size these items are necessarily, right? Or they certainly don't care if it's their size. They're very particular about brand because they know that when you sell online, it's an entirely brand driven process, right? So having complementary different consumer groups coming into your store, I think is great, right? It enables you to sell a wider variety of goods at a wider variety of price points. Thrift stores are ill-equipped to take advantage of this because they don't know how to price stuff because the sorting process is such a giant, ambiguous kind of puddle.
Hmm.
And that's what Helpsy's tech fixes is the sorting and pricing process. But if you are running a thrift store, you have an online customer to appeal to. You have a mom with kids who's trying to save money and dress her kids to appeal to. You have the, whatever we call them now, people that are 20, Gen Z, Gen whatever they'll, right? You have those people who are trying to be cool and interesting, right? You have all these different constituencies, and the design and the attractiveness of your store needs to reflect, your audience and where you want your audience to go. And the pricing, I think, also, if you price too low in your store, you're really unable to kind of grow the store as quickly as you should. And you lose your high end inventory too quickly, which means you lose a whole segment of the buying base. I spoke with a thrift store owner. He's got a couple stores. He says, I don't care about the people that come less than once a week. And I said, wait, there are people that go thrift shopping every week? He's like, yeah, like all my sales are to people that come at least once a week. Now, it turns out prices are wacky low. So I think he's got buyers coming in from the bigger city that's near his place, driving 40 miles to a store and just cleaning them out every
Right.
one day.
Right.
So there's a lot out there. And one of the things that Helpsy does, because we have this trading business, is we try to prevent waste at our customers as well, right? So if you have extra large clothes going into Central America, that's not really a good match, right? So there are times that we will buy those extra large clothes and sell them to U.S. stores. Now those clothes don't have a lot of value, but they have some, right? And that's also true of winter coats. When we give away winter coats every year, those are not coats that go to our bins necessarily. Those are coats that we buy from our customers who are in a warm weather place, and are likely to just chuck those coats otherwise.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of opportunity, and it's I think more than any other industry I've looked at, the lack of information is a more crippling problem in secondhand than anything else. When I sell clothes to someone, they don't know what I'm sending them. They might know what I told them, but there's no verification process, right? And then if they complain, I don't know if they're being honest or not, right? So
Right.
it's much different than a real supply chain, and that creates a whole host of challenges that we're trying to bring transparency to the industry to address.
Right. Interesting. Interesting. Well, maybe on that note, in terms of brand and transparency, let's kind of segue into just the employer brand that Helpsy has. Because I think, again, I want to spend some time on this. This is a common question. A lot of our members are trying to navigate. Should I go into employee ownership? What's the right structure for me? So I want to just start maybe early in those conversations. You mentioned many years of unprofitability, right? Partners always have to come together and make a decision together. What were those early conversations like, and what inspired Helpsy to pursue employee ownership?
Yeah, so I'm super fortunate that my two partners are my best friends from high school. Our families have known each other since before we were born. And we're effectively brothers, right? But legally we're not, which is convenient at various times. But this has been a passion project for us from the beginning, right? I think we were all at situations in our careers where we were reasonably comfortable, but we weren't feeling like we were accomplishing a whole lot, right? The impact is very tangible. The stress is also very tangible, right? Initially, we were the only owners of the companies, in part because there wasn't really any value for anybody, and in part because when you're dealing with the SBA and various other kind of lenders, it gets a little tricky if you have
Sure.
the wrong number of people owning the wrong percentage of these companies, right? Um, and also, we were, I think, a little unsophisticated, right? So initially, we were a little LLCs, right? And in fact, we had some in common and some that we owned individually that all kind of worked together, right? And that was largely driven by insurance concerns or financing concerns or whatever, right? So there's not a model most people can pursue, but if, for instance, COVID hits and you get relief money based on the size of your entity and you legally have lots of entities, then that's pretty convenient, right? It wasn't why we did it, but that's just how it happened, right? If also the regulations of how you run a collection business in New York are different than New Jersey, it's helpful to have different legal entities, right? And a lot of times, a lot of places, like for instance, New York, New Jersey, there's a direct legal conflict in how you're supposed to operate in one state versus the other.
I'm there.
Right?
Yeah.
There is no single model that's legal in both places. So that was part of the journey. When we realized how effective online sales were initially in the early COVID months, that created the opportunity to take in investors. That kind of required us to consolidate into one, C corp, which we decided to have a public benefit corp. And we did the public benefit corp, largely so that if we had too much influence from our investors, they couldn't change the fundamental ethos of the company, right? So we formed the public benefit corp that created equity as opposed to kind of partnership interests or whatever. And we were able to, kind of give out a negotiated amount of stock options to our employees. And we chose to give them to all employees, right? Which, most of the people at Helpsy are driving a truck or baling clothes or sorting clothes. These are not occupations traditionally, populated by investment bankers and consultants, right? So it was an education process for people. I'm sure lots of our employees don't necessarily know or care about it. But we've doubled down on how much equity our employees have, and try to make people think with two hats, their employee hat and their shareholder hat, right? And I think that's become increasingly effective as we've done more kind of education particularly of our key, kind of more senior staff. The ultimate, there is no really an ultimate plan for Helpsy, as far as like who's going to own it 10 years from now. But I would like the people that built it to, benefit from it. And those people are employees who've been with us for a long time and have been working really hard, you know? So that's something that we're able to do because while we have outside shareholders, we're kind of the more dominant shareholders, and so we can make decisions to benefit our employees as long as we're not disadvantaging other stakeholders.
Sure. Now, let's talk a little bit about incentives and what's worked for you and your experience so far. You talked about variable compensation a little bit before the show, about, hey, this has maybe been a structure that's helped us. Tell us a little bit about the bonus compensation. Is it at the end of the year? What are those milestones someone has to hit? And what's that experience been like so far in terms of the productivity or improvement or performance for Helpsy?
Yeah, so thank you. So I would say it's not perfect, and we haven't figured everything out, right? We still experiment, we still change what we're doing. Um, it's also, I think, a fair comment. Some people might say fair criticism that our wages are higher than our competitors, systematically, structurally, significantly higher. Which, uh, you know, it's also fair to say that our profit margins are almost certainly lower than our main competitors, right? That's okay. That's not the only thing we're trying to aim for here, right? So Helpsy employees all have, or Helpsy hourly employees all have hourly wages, kind of, there's like state mandates, right? As far as wage and hour laws, right? We
Hmm.
comply with all those, obviously. In many cases, in New York and New Jersey, minimum wages are in the 1650 kind of area, right? So the hourly wages are often not much above minimum, but we pay very substantial commissions. These are paid biweekly or monthly, depending on, frankly, how much of a pain it is to calculate, right? Um, and so the drivers are paid for all the weight that they bring in, right?
Okay.
Which has the side effect of them, number one, wanting to get the routes that give them the most weight and giving us what I think of as very constructive feedback about when their time is being used effectively and when it's not.
Hmm.
And number two, it creates a check on if there's a problem reporting and analyzing the weight, the drivers are there making sure that they get theirs, right?
Sure.
The warehouse folks are paid for every pound that goes through the warehouse. That's a little bit of a trickier model because it's more of a joint structure as opposed to individual. And that's also a little harder to calculate just by the nature of what they do. But the warehouse workers are typically coming from the most disadvantaged backgrounds because they don't necessarily have the ability to even drive, right? But they earn real money too, just like everybody else. The sorters are also tricky to compensate because you want to incentivize the correct behavior, right? Accurate sorting, accurate high speed sorting, right? And so we pay them various commissions for the things that they sort, and we do audits, kind of an ongoing randomized audit, to make sure people are not kind of gaming the system, right?
Sure.
And then the managerial level, the regional managers are compensated in part on the profitability of their regions, and that profitability, we walk them through how worker safety plays into profitability, right? How insurance rates play into it, allocating the trucks reasonably. We also compensate them for growth because with a network like ours, in some ways it's kind of similar to like a cell phone company, right? There's a churn rate, and you need to grow faster than the churn rate. We also There's a bit of a natural monopoly effect in clothing bins. We are far from a monopoly, but there is a network efficiency of having lots of collection points in a limited geographical area, right? So if you lose collection points, not only did you lose that revenue and potentially have to lay off a driver, but you
Right.
also made all the other drivers less profitable. So we compensate the managers for profitability and growth, which themselves are often in tension. Um, and then the other folks in the company, if my partners and I can figure out a way to compensate them in a variable way, we do so, right? That's hard to do with things like accounting, but we try to do the best we can. Uh, we People I think know on the blue collar side, Helps is the place to work if you want to make the most money, right? It's not the easiest job. On the white collar side, it's definitely not, right? People could make better money somewhere else. Certainly the kind of people with the kind of talent who stick at Helpsy could make more money somewhere else. They have to believe in what we're doing, right? To stick around. I wish I could pay them more, but I also really like having people that are, largely motivated by what we're doing.
Right. Right, sure. Now with all that going on, all these different goals for these different positions, like I want to like learn like what the CEO dashboard looks like and how you set goals. I mean, do you set ambitious goals? Do you set like a set 15% increase each year? If we're not hitting our goals, do you adjust them throughout the year in order to hit compensation? Tell me a little bit about the CEO dashboard that you're currently looking at and how you set those goals.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say it's a work in process all the time, right? There's a great deal of data that someone at Helpsy needs to really understand. That person doesn't always have to be me, but someone needs to be all over it. Um, as far as goal setting, I don't really believe in it.
Ah,
I am a forecaster. Like my job on Wall Street for 15 years was to forecast the future, right? It's probably the only business thing I'm good at. Um, and so I try to forecast where we are going, right? And then we use that forecast and, a couple different scenarios around that forecast to say, what can we do better? What do we need to do better? Right? Uh, when you've made 16 acquisitions, you've gotten to look at the books from those 16 places, as well as about 40, 50 other places that we've failed to purchase. And we can understand when one place has trucking that's 70% cheaper than ours. Maybe there's an opportunity there. Someone might pay rents that are lower than ours or higher than ours. Why is that, right? So we try to use the learnings of other companies as well as our own experience to say this is what we can do. But I've worked at some places where they said, we're going to grow revenue 15%, and it's like, well, if you sell oatmeal, you're going to grow revenue 2%. That's what's going to happen, and you need to structure your business around that reality, right? In our business, uh, our main product is a commodity product. Things like, I don't know, tariffs and international tensions and currency movements are kind of like scary. Um, the cost of collecting clothing is highly variable based on where you collect it in the country, um, predominantly because you pay rents for locations in some parts of the country, not others, and theft is a bigger issue in some parts of the country than others. And if theft's a big issue, you have to go more often than you should go to a location, right? So we're structurally in kind of a less profitable part of the country to operate in at the moment.
mhm.
Has the highest quality clothes, but also by far the highest operating expenses. Um, and so we just have to, navigate around that and make sure the business is resilient for when things come down the pike that are negative.
Now, tell me a little bit more about how, I guess the question we talked about last week is, how will the new U.S. administration impact your business? Obviously, just coming in right now. Tell me a little bit more about, you mentioned tariffs, you mentioned some other policies that potentially might impact your business. What are those?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're an economist like me, used clothing is fascinating, right? Because literally everything affects the used clothing. A big snowstorm in part of the country affects used clothing, right? Um, Lots and
Mm.
lots of US used clothing, either before or more typically after it's gone through a US thrift store, gets exported, right? And supply and demand are both like there's a lot of goods moving around, right? And a market that is relatively small might close down because of someone paid a bribe to somebody or there's some political pressure, right? Um, and a small market that is, 2% of global trade shuts down, that actually affects prices everywhere else in a pretty big way, right? So, if there's tension at the U.S. Mexico border, that's Mexico's a big market for a lot of people in used clothing, right?
Mm.
And that's those people that can't sell there then need to like see if they can sell domestically or see if they can sell in Guatemala or see if they can sell to
Right. Got it.
wherever, right? So that creates issues. Europe has managed to screw up their used clothing industry really, really tremendously. Um, First with the Ukraine attack by Russia, which closed the two largest markets for winter clothing, right? Being Ukraine and Russia, right? So high quality winter clothing used to go to those places. It doesn't really anymore, right? which means if the winter portion of your stream is now worthless, the summer portion of your stream can't carry that loss, right?
Right.
So, so people who used to import clothes from the U.S. into Europe no longer do, as I understand it. Those clothes have to go somewhere else, and then clothes are coming from Europe to a lot of the same export markets. Europe then managed to, with their recent regulations, they are trying to kill the global trade in used clothing, which seems like a really weird policy objective to me. Um, and that's actually good for U.S. companies that export clothing in the short term, but it's bad for the world. Um, and it's just incredibly dumb. The largest used clothing store in Europe went bankrupt about 4 or 5 months ago. So that's a big negative external pressure, right? And to the extent the dollar is super strong, it makes it harder to compete internationally. Helpsy's business has been more and more domestic focused. Partly because I think it's more efficient, a more efficient way to match the value of the clothes with the right consumers, but also because the export risks are pretty wild. But a hurricane hits Guatemala, even if Helpsy doesn't sell to Guatemala, it still hurts Helpsy, right? Because other people who do sell there
Resellers. Right.
are, yeah. And everybody's linked, and it's a pretty small world. Helpsy is one of the largest, pure collectors who doesn't have thrift stores, but we're still talking about 1 out of every 1,000 items that gets thrown away in the U.S. ends up at Helpsy, right? That's not a lot. I mean, really, right? So there's the people that are our size and smaller are definitely price takers, right? We just sit there and take it, and hope that it doesn't get too bad.
Well, Dan, I appreciate you just taking the time to kind of share with our audience today a little bit about kind of the world of secondhand clothing and obviously which is fascinating, the economics behind it. Folks, as you're listening, I just want to make sure you're preparing some questions here for Dan. We're going to open it up here to Q&A. So if you do have a Q&A, go ahead and turn on your camera, raise your hand, or put a question into the chat, and I'll go ahead and ask that for you. While they're thinking about a few questions, Dan, the last question I want to kind of wrap up with is just what is your kind of growth philosophy? What is your role as CEO? How do you see your role as a CEO, and what in terms of what you need to do for the organization to hit its mission?
Yeah, I mean, my job is like sales, internal sales to the employees and potential employees, external kind of business development. Not really sales per se, but bigger deals, right? Um, there is a enormous amount of opportunity for Helpsy and for companies like Helpsy, right? In a space that is growing, an industry that's growing rapidly, is super fragmented, is by and large a data-free industry, and there's a lot of opportunity here. I feel a moral obligation to grow Helpsy, not necessarily because like, hey, that's more profits, but really because, if we go out and collect more clothes, those clothes otherwise would have probably gone in the trash, right? And if we go out and hire somebody, otherwise that person may not have had a job, right? It's it's incumbent on my partners and I and our employees to really push the ball down every day and say, look, it's a pain in the ass to like open a new sorting facility and get the right permits and get the right supply and take the risk that someone will buy the product. We're going to do it anyway because it's not so much our job, it's our vocation, right?
Mm.
And that's not for everybody. Some days it's not for me, frankly. But that's what we're doing. And I couldn't be, happier with how the opportunity I've been given to actually have a job that I feel like makes a difference every day.
Love it, love it. And maybe back full circle, what's the main reason you decided to leave your job on Wall Street?
Uh, I got bored, you know. I got bored, and I finally got good at it. I think is what happened.
Mm.
It took me about 12 years. I finally got good at it, and being good at it's fun for like a year, and then you're like, well, what am I doing? Am I comparing paychecks with somebody else? Am
Sure.
I, Like, I don't need a two-bedroom apartment. There's just one of me. Like just kind of uh, that was a thing. And also, I worked. I got myself to a position where I worked hard enough that doctors would tell me I had to get out of the job or I was going to be dead by the end of the year.
Mm.
I had my final job on Wall Street was, I mean, there was a 5 hour 5 hour daily interval at night between meetings, 11:30 to 4:30 at night, 7 days a week. So
Mm.
the most you could ever sleep in a day was 5 hours,
Mm.
um, and that was pretty awful. So Helpsy, we work hard at Helpsy, but we try not to be, aggressively hostile to the health of our employees.
Sure. Well, Dan, thanks for keeping it real here on these Real Leaders Top Impact Company Speaker Series.